Happy Monday! I've got a surprise extra video for you this week because I have just finished a video project I've been working on for a few months. This is books that my girlfriend recommended to me, i.e. Raph recommends. Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and I have been dating my girlfriend Raph for a few months now, and if you've been watching these videos recently where I talk about books that she recommended to me, you may notice that she has very good reading taste. Her reading taste aligns very well with mine. Anytime she recommends me a book, buys me a book, I seem to love it. So I decided I was going to film my reactions to the next 10 books that I read on her recommendation to see if the streak continued. So I've been collecting this footage over the last few months, and it's been really funny because people do keep commenting on my videos whenever I mention a book that Raph has talked about. People keep saying, give us the Raph recommends videos, and they don't know that I've actually already been making it. So here it is, this is Raph recommends. This is actually the first book that Raph ever recommended to me. The first night that we met at a party before we were together, she just started talking to me about this book and how much she recommended it and said that it had been Booker longlisted, but that shouldn't put me off. And I thought it was a great recommendation because often that does put me off because I think it's going to be too hard to read. And she told me all about it and said that one of the characters reminded her of Kristen Stewart, and I was just instantly intrigued. And I finished it. I've been reading this one for maybe 2 weeks. I've been really savouring it, and it is a chunky book. I absolutely loved it. This is another 5-star read. Such a great recommendation from Raph here. And kind of hilarious because actually, like I said, this was the first book that she ever recommended to me, and very early days. Like, before we were together, this was actually one of the first conversations we ever had, and she just was like, I read this really great book. So somehow she managed to get my reading taste spot on without actually knowing me at that point. I just spoke to her on the phone just now after finishing it, and she reminded me that she had hinted in that first conversation about the fact there is some sapphic romance in this book, and actually I hadn't remembered that before. So when I was reading this, that did come as a surprise to me. I hadn't been expecting it, so it was a very welcome surprise. Right now when I'm filming this, she is actually reading The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo on my recommendation, which she said is like this book's little sister, and I think that's really true. They're pretty similar, not in their plot necessarily, but in their format. But Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is maybe, I don't know the right wording, I don't want to say more accessible because actually they're both really accessible. I found this book really, really readable, but this is a Booker longlisted book. But as Raph said, don't let that put you off. It is a really readable book. But I think Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is maybe the slightly more like beach ready version of this. This one has a more complex structure. But if you're someone who doesn't really read much literary fiction and you really liked Seven Husbands, this might be like your next step up, I would say. Anyway, fantastic recommendation. Another 5-star. Raph can do no wrong. This book has essentially 2 storylines that we're following. In the past, we are meeting Marion Graves, who is a female pilot who we know right from the beginning of the book. She's a fictional female pilot. She attempted to fly a great circle around the whole globe, but crashed right before the end, and all that was found was her logbook. And then we kind of go back and we follow her whole life up until that point. She has this very dramatic life, and I loved learning all about her and the various twists and turns that her life took, including going and flying as part of the war effort, and so lots of tragedy that happened to her and lots of adventure that happened to her. In the present day, we then meet a young woman called Hadley Baxter, who is a famous movie star who is playing Marion in the movie adaptation. So the logbook that was found was published and that became a book. Then somebody wrote a fictional book about it, and then that book is being adapted into a movie, and we really get to explore the different layers of the different adaptations, and I loved that element of it so much as well. And then of course towards the end you will find that all these threads come together in ways that you didn't quite expect. It had such a good ending. Absolutely loved it. 5-star book, 5-star recommendation. What's next? Okay, so I've just finished the next of Raph's recommendations, which was The Paper Palace by Miranda, Cowley. And this was another 5-star. She does it again. So The Paper Palace is told simultaneously just all in the course of one day, and then also with flashbacks spanning 50 years. So our main character, Elle, is a woman who is 50? In her 50s, and the morning that we meet her, she has woken up and gone for a swim, and this is the morning after she slept with a childhood friend, a friend who, as we're going to learn, she has been in love with for a very long time, but she is married and she has children, so she cheated on her husband with this man, Jonas. And we meet her waking up in the morning and going for a swim and kind of reliving the events of the night before. So that's one of the timelines that we then follow throughout the book, is literally hour by hour throughout that day, her then meeting up with Jonas on the beach. Jonas is the man that she slept with, Peter is her husband. Both really lovely men. We get to see that her relationship with her husband Peter is also very, very loving and very stable, but her love with Jonas is really, really passionate. They've known each other since they were children, and it's really intense. And so, as well as following this day, in which nothing much happens other than her grappling with this guilt and this decision, we also go back and span her life so far. And warning, her life so far contains a lot of trauma. There are some very upsetting events that have happened. We even go back to her mother's childhood and learn about some of the terrible things that happened to her mother. There are a lot of very unhappy marriages throughout the book, and that's an understatement. That's the least of the problems. It was just written in a really beautiful way. I found it really page-turning, both when you're reading these sections from the past where quite a lot of drama happens, and then also the present day section, which is much more slow moving and just contemplative. I found all of it equally page-turning because it was written so beautifully, and it's got this theme of water running the whole way through it. So the Paper Palace, the name, is this camp that our main character's grandfather built, and it's sort of run down, slightly falling apart, but it's on the waterfront, and that's where Elle and her family, and then also Jonas and his family, are staying for the summer, as they have been doing for many, many years since they were children. And so we get lots of scenes of them going for swims in the water. There was a quote from it that I really liked. There was, "You never regret a baby or a swim." It's a book that there's lots to discuss about. The ending is, I thought, ambiguous. And it's interesting, a lot of people think the ending is ambiguous, and then the author herself has said that she didn't really mean it to be ambiguous, and so there is a way of reading it. If she didn't mean it to be ambiguous, then I think I know which way she meant it to be, but I quite liked that it's not fully resolved by the end. In my head, I think it could go either way. I have my own kind of prediction of how this future is going to go for Elle. So that's another 5-star book for my list. Raf's recommendations are stellar so far. I'm going to finish doing my makeup. Okay, I am ready for work. I don't know what book I can possibly pick up after this. I want to spend a bit more time just sitting and thinking about Elle and Peter and Jonas. But you know, not that long. I got books to read. I finished Sauron Bliss yesterday on the train, and I was just, my eyes were streaming with tears when I finished this one. So Raf did warn me that this one might be a little close to home in some bits. There might be some topics that I found a bit hard to read about, and she was right. But I haven't even said whether or not I enjoyed it. I loved it. This is another 5-star read. Honestly, she's on such a roll. When is this streak gonna end? I'm nervous about it. I loved this one so much, but it did break my heart into 1,000 pieces. It's about a woman with severe mental health issues throughout her life. It's about motherhood, her relationship with not being a mother, and her relationship with her mother, and then her sister, who's like her best friend in the world, has loads of children, and so kind of motherhood in different forms, in different relationships to our main character is kind of a recurring theme. And towards the end of the book, that really became very, very emotional. It's about a marriage falling apart. It's about lots of things that I found difficult to read about. But it was just beautiful. It was really, really well written while being really accessible to read. I actually listened to this kind of half on audiobook and then I half read it physically, and usually audiobooks I really struggle to concentrate, but this one, I don't know if it was because it was read by Emilia Fox, who's got such a wonderful voice to listen to, but also I think because the writing was just very easy to listen to, but that, I don't mean that in that it wasn't beautiful writing, I don't mean that it was kind of simple, it was easy to listen to, but it was beautiful. I thought it was really clever the way she wrote it. But yeah, another 5-star from Raf. Bloody hell, what next? Sea of Tranquility is a time travel novel, so that is always a pretty good bet with me. I do love time travel, but I'm very, very picky about it. The way that it works in here was so cool. This book is really, really difficult to explain, but was so readable, so easy to read, and like very easy to follow despite being a very confusing concept. But it's told, the book is like an onion with layers. So it starts in 1912 and then jumps forward a century and then again and again, and we get into the middle, into the far future, where we meet the time traveller who has appeared randomly in all the sections so far, and then once we've met him, we then like go back through the layers. As well as being about time travel, it's also about this weird anomaly in time, and I won't tell you too much about like the other kind of sci-fi concept in here because it's a fun little twist, but I loved exploring that. This is the most science fiction-y of Emily St. John Mandel's books that I've read so far, but don't let that put you off. I'm not a sci-fi person at all, and I loved this. I thought it worked so well. It's got characters from the Glass Hotel that show up. It's also got references to Station 11. She's crafting this whole multiverse, and I'm here for it. It's just, she's such a mesmerizing writer, and the way that she plays with reality and kind of parallel worlds is so cool, and like works just within this book on its own. You don't have to have read any of her other books to absolutely love this one, but then putting it in the wider context of her other books, it's like they're all slightly parallel universes of each other, and I loved that. If you've never read any Emily St. John Mandel, I'd recommend starting with this one. It's really, really accessible. The Glass Hotel is her last book that I loved, but was a lot weirder. I think more people will like this one. Anyway, 5 stars to the book, 5 stars to my girlfriend. And the streak continues. The next book that I read on Raf's recommendation is Everything You Ever Wanted by Luiza Sauma. This is actually one that Raf recommended to me ages and ages ago, like in one of the first or second conversations that we had, and she actually bought this one for me, but she said that she very nearly didn't because it's a book that she had read before, and it is very much about mental illness and suicidal thoughts, and she knew at that point from watching some of my videos that I had been kind of speaking about my own mental health issues in the past, and so she said she was a bit worried about buying me this one, but she did eventually because I said it sounded good, but I've only just got around to reading it. I loved this one. This was another 5-star read. Honestly, this streak, when is it going to break? It's going to be embarrassing when it breaks. This is about a girl in her late 20s living in London called Iris, who is working at this job that she hates. Like the first half of the book is quite darkly funny. It's about millennial life and the ennui of working at a digital agency where no one knows what any of what they're talking about means. And she learns about this program, which is based on a real thing, the Mars One project. That was a real thing that I was obsessed with. This is a fictionalized version of it, Life on Nyx, and essentially there is a planet called Nyx, and they are running a program to send people on a one-way mission to Nyx. You can go and live on this other planet, but you can never come home. The whole thing is being funded by a reality TV show, so while you're out there, you'll be being live streamed back to Earth. But you can have no contact with Earth, so you say goodbye to your friends and family, and that is it forever for the rest of your life. And Iris, who is deeply unhappy, and I said the first half of the book is darkly funny. It is, but it's also very sad, because that's the darkly part of it. She's a very unhappy person. She has serious depression. She has had suicidal thoughts since she was a teenager. There's a history of suicide in her family. She has a strange relationship with her mother. Someone just revving their engine over there. She decides that a one-way ticket to another planet sounds like a great idea for her. So the first half of the book is set on Earth in the build-up to this, and the second half of the book is set on Nyx 8 years later, 8 years after they arrive, or 7 years after they arrive, some years after they arrive, and it's pretty depressing. So all of the humour from the first half kind of drops off in the second half. But it's such a strange book, and I loved it. It is really, really sad. It's got this like high concept of living on another planet, but it's really about loneliness and sadness and saying goodbye to people, and it's very much about suicide. Iris's friends and family see her mission to Nyx as a form of suicide, and then in the second half of the book she's kind of reckoning with that, and so all the other settlers who went there. It ends in a strange way that not everyone will enjoy. It's not what I was expecting. I had a few different thoughts of how the ending could go, including ending ambiguously, and none of the options that I thought up were quite what actually happened. It has a very odd, unusual ending, which I really liked, because I like an ending that can surprise me, but still leave me with a million questions. I've got no idea what actually was going on. So ever since reading this, I've been reading loads of other reviews, other interpretations, to try and see what other people think. A lot of people were pissed off by that ending, so you might be, but I really enjoyed it. 5 stars yet again. Next up, I read Stir Fry by Emma Donoghue. This was a lovely book, really lovely. I'm so happy I read this. So this is a book that came out, hang on, let me confirm this, 1994. So this book existed the whole time I was growing up, but I didn't know about it, and I'm so sad because I would have loved to read this when I was younger. Raph recommended this one to me because she did read it when it first came out, and she said that for her it was the first time she read a book that really showed it's okay to be gay. It's a, you know, it's a happy gay story, and that was so important. And you know, luckily we do have more of those now. Still not enough, I think, but we do. But I think if I had read this one earlier, it would have meant so much to me. However, reading it now, still delightful. So this is about an Irish girl who leaves home, goes off to university, and she ends up sharing a flat with these two slightly older girls who is obvious to, well, it's obvious to a modern reader. I don't know if it was obvious to a reader in 1994, I assume so, that these girls are in a relationship with each other. But it is not obvious to our main character, Mariah. She's very naive, and so we see her kind of realization of this, and it's a sexual awakening of sorts. And I love reading about the relationship between Ruth and Yael, who are the couple that she moves in with. It's not a perfect relationship, it's quite a complicated relationship, but it is loving and it is real, and it, you know, it does just present them as any other relationship in your 20s where things are a bit hard and you're at uni and you're going through the same ups and downs as any other relationship, which, you know, as I say, should not be groundbreaking, but would have been lovely to read about when I was growing up. The characters are really funny, and the time and place really came to life for me. This is a book that I do want to reread. As you may know, I'm not a big rereader. I can imagine myself going back and back to this book. Also makes me want to go back and read more of Emma Donoghue's backlist. I've read all of her books up to date, except for her very most recent one, which just came out, called Haven. I haven't read that yet, but I've read all the others that have come out since I started working at Macmillan at least, and have loved them, and they've all been really different. But going back and reading this earlier style, which is, you know, feels totally different from her more recent stuff, makes me want to go back and read a lot more of the books that she was writing in the 90s. I have two updates for you because since I last checked in, I have read two Raph Recommends books. First, on holiday I read Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers, which was a 5-star read. I adored this book. This was one of those just like delightful reading experiences where I was on holiday with my family and with Raph, and I had not had like a hugely successful reading week so far. I kept just like getting distracted because we were doing loads of other fun things, so I just like wasn't reading that much. And then I started reading this one, and suddenly it was like, I don't want to go swimming, I don't want to go out for lunch, I don't want to do anything, I just want to read this book. So that's a pretty good sign. This is a book about a journalist who answers a letter that's like written into the paper where she works from a woman who claims that her daughter, who is now 10 years old, was born without the input of any man at all. So essentially was a virgin birth. And so our main character Jean goes to investigate this story. And it's not really about solving that mystery, that is interesting, trying to figure out what happened and how this baby was born. It's more about the relationships that develop between Jean and Gretchen, who is the mother, Margaret, who is the child, I can't remember the name of the husband, Howard, I think, who is Gretchen's husband now, who's always like, yep, I fully believe her, and then various other characters from Gretchen's past. I just loved it, could not get enough of it. It's been divisive because it has this ending which a lot of people find incredibly frustrating. I thought the ending was pretty clever. Then I read instructions for a heatwave, which is appropriate because we're currently in a heatwave. So this one was a very specific recommendation. Raph and I went to a bookshop on like one of the hottest days of this month, and we wanted to get some books and read them in the garden and drink rosé, and this was a book in the shop, so Raph recommended that I read it because it's set in a heatwave in like basically around Finsbury Park, which is near where Raph lives, so it was a perfect reading experience. Overall, I'd say I gave this one a 4. It's about a family, so the mother of the family is an Irish woman living in North London. Her husband like sets off to the shop, as he often does, and then just doesn't come back. And so she has to call her 3 children, her 3 grown-up children, who are all going through like crises of their own, to come and help her figure out where her husband has gone. And again, just like Small Pleasures, it's not so much about that mystery. You do go on the journey of finding out where he's gone. It is interesting, but actually what really drives the story is the characters. So each of the 3 children is going through like pretty difficult situations, and particularly the youngest daughter, I was like fascinated by her. She's been living in New York, so yeah, great characters to read about. This was probably close to a 5-star. I think I ended up giving it a 4 because it ended and I still wanted so much more from it, which, you know, like, that's a good thing. It shows I was really invested. But yeah, overall I gave it a 4, but it was like a 5-star recommendation for reading it that day because it all felt very apt. I've read 8 Raf Recommends books so far. They have all been 4s or 5s. I'm going to read 2 more for this video, so that I've tried 10, and if they continue, if the last 2 can also be 4s and 5s, then I will officially admit that Raf recommends the best books. No pressure. Next book I read was Trust. I've just finished this one. I've got the proof here. Trust is an interesting one because this is a book that we publish at the company where Raf and I both work, but I never would have picked it up. Like, we publish a lot of books. I obviously can't read all of them. That was one that I thought looked very, very clever, very interesting, but not for me. So I wouldn't have picked it up, but Raf said that it was amazing and a really, really interesting book, and she recommended that I read it. So I did, and she was right. So Trust is basically a book that is divided into 4 sections. It's 4 different retellings of the same story. So the first section is like a full novel that is about this couple in the 20s, this married couple who are just incredibly wealthy, and like even after the Wall Street crash, the husband just keeps making more and more and more money. So that's told as like a novel in its own right, the story of their lives. Then we move into part 2, and it's revealed that that is just a novel written based on these real people, again real, within the world of the book, and the real life billionaire guy is really pissed off because he's like, everyone's reading this novel and it's completely untrue and it paints the wrong picture of me and particularly the wrong picture of my wife, so I want to tell my own story. So then we get his attempt at his autobiography. Then in the 3rd section we hear from the woman who he hired to help him write that autobiography, and she again reveals a slightly different version of the truth. And then finally in the 4th section we get the diaries of the wife. So totally different each section. You're like, back to the drawing board, let's try and learn about these characters again. So it's very, very clever, it's very meta, it's on the book along list and like very well deserved. I imagine it will be on the shortlist as well. It's a very, very clever book. I will be thinking about it for a long time. However, doesn't necessarily mean that it was like enjoyable the whole time to read. The first section I thought was fine, the one that's like the novel was fine. I probably would have DNF'd it if Raf hadn't told me that it was such an interesting book. I might have just been like, this isn't for me. And if I hadn't known that there was going to be that novel within a novel with a novel structure, I would have thought this isn't interesting. But it was fine. Like, I got into it. The second section, where he's writing his own autobiography, is very hard to read, like almost impossible to read. My suggestion, just skim through it, which is also what Raf told me to do. And then it's only in section 3, which is literally half through the book, that I started to find it an enjoyable book to read. That said, it's really hard to rate it because for like half of the book I wasn't particularly enjoying it. I wasn't disliking it, I was just like, I can see what this is doing, I can see that this is clever, I'm not personally having a fun time. But then in section 3 I did start to actually genuinely really enjoy it myself. I'm gonna give it 4 stars, I think, and I've been going back and forth about this because my ratings are, I always say my ratings are about my enjoyment, not about like critical review, and I'm being slightly swayed by how impressive I thought the book was here, because my enjoyment of it obviously was not a 4-star throughout, because there are bits that I just said were boring, but this book I think is going to stick with me, and I think that I will overall look back on it as a 4-star reading experience. All of that to say, that was another successful Raf Recommends, though it was a very different type of book from the rest of the books I've read on her recommendation in this video. It's like less obviously a me book, but it is a me book in that I really enjoy books that play with form in this way. So I've only got 1 book left to read. I'm about to go to Italy. Raf has recommended that I read Still Life by Sarah Winman while I'm in Italy because it is set where we're going to be. So that's the final book I'm going to read, and then I will report back having read 10 Raf Recommends books, and I'll give you my final verdict on her recommendations. And with that, I have finished the 10th and final book that Raf recommended to me, and this one was a biggie because this book was the one that Raf loved most of all. It was her favourite book of the year so far. The year hasn't finished yet, and so I had a lot of pressure to love this one, and thank God I did, That book was Still Life by Sarah Winman, and I gave this book 5 stars. If you're up to date with my videos, you will already have known that, because this book has featured in 2 videos that I've uploaded recently, both videos that were filmed during my holiday in Italy. One of them was when I was nearly finished it. I did a video with my dad and my sister talking about what we'd been reading, and I said how much I was loving this one so far. And then I also did a vlog of the whole holiday, so you can see my whole reading experience, including my wrap up. So you may already know, but I'm going to tell you again that I loved this book, and I read it in just the most perfect way because I actually read it in the country and even in the city where it was set. This is a book that really hinges on how much you fall in love with the characters. It's just got the most incredible cast of characters. The main character is, when we first meet him, a young soldier called Ulysses, and we meet him in 1944 in Tuscany during the war. And it's this one night really that we spend with him when he meets Evelyn Skinner, who is a fantastic art historian. She's there with her latest lover, who is called Margaret someone. That's what she's called in the book, Margaret someone, and she doesn't really like her. She finds her irritating. Anyway, she and Ulysses meet and they talk about art, and they just go through this incredible night that sort of changes the course of particularly Ulysses's life. We then follow both of these characters, but mainly Ulysses, over the next 4 decades, 5 decades, and meet more and more just incredibly ridiculous characters. Ulysses has a bunch of really weird friends. We follow him back to London and we meet his ex-wife Peg, who works at a pub run by this terrifying man called Cole, who is definitely a murderer. One of the pub regulars is this man called Cress, who has seemingly psychic abilities. The pub is also the home to a parrot who at first is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but does then start talking again and is possibly the most intelligent character in the whole book. And then there is a twist of fate. So Ulysses receives a letter that harks back to something that happened to him back when he was in Italy during the war, and it ends up with him moving to Florence with a bunch of these hilarious characters, and we just follow them through the years. It's one of those books where nothing really happens, but so much happens because we're spanning their whole lives. Near the end of the book, there is a very big dramatic event, and from watching interviews with Sarah Winman since reading it, I've discovered that that is the event that kind of inspired her to write it in the first place. It's this real historical event I had no idea about. It sounded terrifying. Overall, the book is just really, really funny. It's really heartwarming. It's got incredibly moving moments. It might make you cry if you're a crier, but also make you laugh out loud. Raph and I had a lot of fun quoting bits of this book when we were going around Florence. I will link to the vlog of that below if you want to watch. But yeah, fantastic recommendation. I'm so glad I finished on a high, finished on a 5-star read. And you know what that means? That means that in this video, every single book that Raph recommended to me, I ended up giving it at least 4 stars, if not 5 stars. We have to respect the taste in books. Let me know in the comments below if you have read any of those books and what you thought of them. Maybe we can get Raph to recommend you some books in the comments as well. I'm very intrigued to see at what point Raph will recommend me a book that I actually don't like. I will definitely update you if and when that happens. Doesn't look like it's going to be anytime soon. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel because I post new videos every Friday, and I'll see you in the next one.